Every working day of the year, another mighty aeroplane rolls off the production line here at the Boeing plant in Seattle in the western United States. All those aeroplanes. And yet, only 1 in 600 of the world's population has ever traveled by air. Those two facts provoke an awesome thought. What is it going to be like in the future when the figure is 2 in 600 and when the world's airline fleets have doubled in size? How pleasant will it be to fly then? How safe will it be? How will the airports cope? And how far will the tourist tide have encroached by then? In this final program, I'm going to go on a very long journey, try to discover where the aeroplane has brought us in 60 years of commercial operation and where it may take us in the future.
Passengers should get out through passport control on the first floor to the final departure lounge.
For passengers Bailey, Gill and Alfred, please go immediately to gate 53 where the flight is now closing.
Concorde lands at Dakar, Senegal, en route from Paris to Rio. The arrival of this costly piece of high technology in a very poor West African country raises difficult questions about the future of the aeroplane in the Third World. Not least whether nations that can scarcely feed themselves should really be buying this most expensive mode of transport. But perhaps it is too late for that question. For most of the 46 African states, an airline is the first of the Western toys to be acquired after independence. It's a symbol of nationhood, of the place they aim to take in the modern world, and perhaps the means to attain it. Despite the high cost of all this hardware, the benefits are considerable. African statesmen fly off to make their voices heard and their votes count in the United Nations. And the aeroplane itself is proving to be a catalyst, a technological spearhead in the battle for progress. More and more, when you fly on African airlines, you'll be flown by Africans in aircraft maintained by Africans.
Flat 40. Landing checks.
Landing checks. Anti-skid, no lights. Auto brakes.
Off.
Ignition on. Speed brake lever.
Green light.
No smoking on. Gear.
Down in 3 greens.
Flaps.
40, green.
Hydraulics. Pressures and quantity normal. Landing checks complete.
Thank you.
Okay, sir, can you give me your airborne time from Banjul, over?
Banjul 1433, 1433.
Air transport works on the economies of developing nations in unexpected ways, creating new markets and new jobs. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon at the village of Kayar in Senegal, the fishing pirogues of ancient design are brought in with their catch. In the recent past, all the fish brought ashore at this colourful West African market was for local consumption. Now the more expensive fish, the sole and the shellfish, are bought by a processing plant, and within a few hours, without being frozen, they'll be on board a jet bound for Paris or Marseille. Fresh fish from Senegal now appears on French dinner plates the day after it was packed here. And as Mediterranean fishing declines, the future for profits and jobs is promising. The aeroplane will continue to make new business links of this kind between rich and poor countries. But not everything transported by air brings pleasure or profit. Looking for a moment at the debit side of air travel, there is one disturbing consequence that's become ever more evident to me as we've been making these programs. Among the many colleagues that I've travelled and worked with in the past months, there's hardly one who hasn't come back from some foreign trip with a health problem. Now, most of the complaints, it's true, were trivial enough, but the global consequences of what the medical profession is now calling airline-transmitted disease is very far from trivial. In parts of West Africa, malaria kills 50% of the children under 4. And although deadly tropical diseases like Lassa fever cause near panic when they suddenly appear in Europe, it's malaria that is potentially the more dangerous, according to an epidemiologist who lives and works here, Dr. Ian McGregor. He recalls a case back in the 1930s when an aeroplane, night-stopping in this part of Africa, may have inadvertently carried malarial mosquitoes across the South Atlantic with dreadful consequences.
This was a classic example. Anopheles gambia got into Brazil, and it proved to be a much more efficient transmitter of malaria than any of the local Brazilian mosquitoes, with the result that it transmitted heavy infections and created an enormous epidemic of malaria which killed tens of thousands of people, and started a major campaign to eradicate this mosquito, Anopheles gambia, from Brazil. But this again, I think, is a case that not only does the aircraft take sick people, but can take a vector of a disease in and enable that vector to become established in a suitable environment elsewhere.
Africa is certainly air freighting its malaria to Europe, and the figures prove it. But it's a two-way traffic. These villagers, studied by McGregor, have demonstrated a whole range of afflictions from across the seas.
I think the story of Hong Kong flu is an excellent example of how aircraft can probably hasten the spread of disease from one part of the world throughout the world. In Hong Kong in 1967, in June I think it was, the first appearance of the virus was detected, and within 4 months, very largely because of air travel, it had spread right throughout Asia. It had spread into Africa. We here in Africa detected our first cases in October of 1967, and by then it was also prevalent, very prevalent in North Africa. It didn't appear in Europe until the following spring, but within 4 months it certainly spread over half the world.
But disease will be no deterrent to the air travellers of the future, particularly to first-time international flyers like these. This is the shape and the colour of a growing market. Black Americans on an air tour of Africa to discover their roots in the old slave market on Gorée Island. They've been brought here by an enterprising travel agent, Kurt Troon.
We came from Detroit to New York, Casablanca, Dakar. We spent 5 days in Dakar. We're going to spend 2 days in Casablanca. And the total package, including hotel accommodations, and we're talking about deluxe hotels, no dumps, is exactly $646 from Detroit.
This is the last slave house here on Gorée.
In the wake of the Roots television series, the new pilgrims come and find the reality even more striking than the fiction.
During this time, 20 million slaves passed through Gorée. 6 million died from deprivation and bad treatment. Gorée was the most important transit center in West Africa.
Alors, au pied comme ceci.
And in the middle there was a big iron ball that the slave had to carry in his hands when he went out to do his toilet. This section of the slave house is where the slave traders lived. Often we ask ourselves, how could they live up there, knowing what was going on downstairs? This corridor leads to the door of no return. When you got to this door, it was goodbye Africa. Each time that they sent a shipment out, someone would try to escape. But the slaves didn't get very far because they were either shot by the guards or eaten by the sharks.
To come here
and see exactly where they left from that escarpment is more than real. Just more than real. I can't begin to tell you.
Well, I have this strong feeling that I'd like to encourage my children to come to Africa and see for themselves what it's all about.
What do you think they'd get out of that experience?
Oh, I think they would be so enriched by coming here. Just coming here, you know. Boat, airplane, anyway, just get here.
The thoughts of roots bringing out the fact that our people had come out, so it just began to bring pride up in me. And to see them here in their country as it is now, it just makes me feel more than proud. And I just look like I want to go back and tell everybody how our people have come. Long way.
Now that I've seen it, it's more exciting than I thought it would be. And it's more depressing than I thought it would be. But I'm happy that I came.
I have heard tales of Africa from my great-grandmother, and I thought she was old and senile. And by coming here, I realized that what she was telling me was the truth, as well as she remembered it.
Do you mean to say your great-grandmother actually remembered coming over?
My great-grandmother remembered Africa.
Do you ever consider what the impact, I can see what the impact is on you, but
yes,
about the impact on Africa?
The impact on Africa, of course, means jobs, a broadening of the tourist industry. And at the same time, of course, I think it's going to mean an influx of dollars into their economy. In many ways, I'm sure that it's going to change their ways of life, probably beyond their own recognition, but then that happens to all of us as we become more international and more global.
Is it going to dilute their culture inevitably?
Yes, we've all become diluted, and what is a culture, but certainly one worldwide culture. And unfortunately, what we have tended to do is to say that cultures either begin or stop at a country's borders, and that is not true. And travel will make it even less true.
What do you think is the potential for this market?
Unlimited. We really haven't scratched the surface in our area, especially with the automotive industry as widespread as it is, with salaries and wages the way they are. We have a large black affluent population that are natural for travel. Up to this point, or up to, let's say, the last 2 years, it has not been their preference. It has been a good automobile, then it has become a good home. Now that we have both, we travel.
And not just black Americans, black Africans, all races and nations will want the new mobility just as soon as they can buy it. And the consequences of that, in human terms, are enormous. As I set off for London Airport on a journey across the world, I'm reminded that the collapse of time and distance has shattered so many assumptions. That in the very recent past, distance and parting presented for many people the prospect of possibly permanent separation, loneliness and despair. Now, thanks to the aeroplane. From the southern to the northern hemisphere, to Alaska, where Chris Branham is also off to see his family. He's done the weekend shopping and he's returning home with the groceries. But when you pop round to the supermarket in Alaska, it involves a little extra. In this case, a 100-mile flight to Anchorage and then back to the wilderness. Because of its vast size, it's bigger than Spain, France and Germany combined, and because it has few roads or railways, Alaska is another of the empty quarters where air transportation is the automatic choice. But it's private flying that makes Alaska so very different, and which makes it a possible signpost for the future. Here, the family aeroplane is not just for the super rich. It's almost like the family car. Already, the state has the world's highest ratio of licensed pilots, 1 for about every 35 residents. And 1 in 40 families, like the Branhams, owns its own aircraft.
How you doing, boys?
Everybody's okay.
Well, I got your groceries. The only thing I forgot was
My corn.
Did you get the corn?
Nope, I left
Get
it.
the mail, the paper?
Yep.
Where's those tomatoes?
Right in there.
Here next to your smooch.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Come on,
But what makes the Branhams unusual, even for Alaska, is that theirs is a 3-plane household with 3 licensed pilots. But then they do make their living from commercial fishing and hunting trips into the wilderness. Dennis Branham, the father of the family and a veteran World War II pilot, flies a small wheelplane from an airstrip that he chopped out of the bush 30 years ago. Steve, the 3rd pilot of the household, flies the other float plane. In a terrain where the only alternative transport is the canoe, the dog sled or snowmobile, 3 planes do not seem to the Branhams in the least excessive.
Everything we got here was brought in with an airplane. There's no other way we could possibly get it here. Boy, look at that smoke.
Right there.
Good old moose burgers.
Can you imagine what living up here without the aeroplane might be like, Dennis?
No, I cannot. I've lived here over 30 years, and I've used it all the time.
Use it for work, use it for play, use it for transportation. It's just a normal, just like you guys would use a
car.
Somebody in England or America would do, well, in the lower 48, as you say, would use a car.
Same way.
You just get in it like you're going for a weekend picnic or you go to have a coffee break with somebody, you get in your airplane and buzz off to someplace 50 miles, 80 miles, or just maybe even a few minutes out of Anchorage. You go across the inlet and you got bears and moose running around.
Flying up here, you encounter some rather unusual sort of hazards, do you know?
Oh, yes, you do. Like bears getting in the airplanes and eating up all the seats and walking on the airplane on the outside. And they can tear them up pretty good.
Do you mean that really happened to you?
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, just the other week, huh?
Yeah. About 2 weeks ago, bear got on the airplane and got actually inside the cockpit.
And you break the window?
And broke the window to get in. And he ate up all my seats and my emergency food, which I carry in case if I ever go down. He ate all that, so...
What about the strobe? Didn't he bite the...
Yeah, he
bit a hole in the strobe light. He had to stand up and bite the little strobe light on top.
What happened to that bear?
Well, we had to destroy it because it was making a menace of itself, causing damage to airplanes like that. We just can't have it.
Priorities in Alaska are crystal clear. Because so many people fly, indulgent attitudes towards the aeroplane prevail. Lake Hood, near Anchorage, is the world's biggest seaplane base. With about 500 float planes parked on or around it, Lake Hood is running out of room, while new pilots keep on coming. It's part of the American credo of personal freedom that the little guy demands the same rights as the big guy. And when that belief is extended to aeroplanes, you're in trouble. For the air traffic controllers in Anchorage, keeping the swarms of light aircraft out of the path of the heavies is a present headache and a future nightmare.
Piper 7134 Delta, taxi runway.
Within 3 years, air traffic will have reached maximum density, and the controllers and the commercial pilots are deeply worried.
Taxi on 31. Piper 34 Delta, taxi runway 13.
Already, air traffic control has a separate operation just to look after light aircraft. How long before a near miss becomes a total disaster at this teeming aerial crossroads?
Northwest, your choice. The wind is 010, variable now at 10. Piper 97 Pop, put your landing light on, please. Piper 97 Pop will be alert. 2 aircraft reporting runway 32 as a flight proceeding northwest bound. In Alaska today, there are suburbs, and not necessarily wealthy ones, built round their own airstrips, with a plane outside every home. And some experts believe that 30 years hence, we shall come to live with a flying car and learn to love the flying meter maid. But not before some major difficulties have been overcome, not least fuel. What is the fuel of the future? That question faces everyone, from the private flyer to the big airline operator to the chief designer at the Boeing Commercial Airplane Company, Holden Withington.
We have looked at alternate fuels. You'll hear a lot about hydrogen and methanol. We can design airplanes to use these fuels. In fact, the engines would love to use hydrogen. It's a fantastically good fuel, but it's also fantastically expensive, and it's a major logistics problem. We took a look, for example, at supplying the Chicago O'Hare Airport with hydrogen for today's airplanes. And we ended up with an installation, a storage installation, that was 30 times the size that we had down at the Cape for all the space launches. And the amount of power required to convert water to hydrogen would be equivalent to 2 nuclear power plants as they exist today. So although the fuel is excellent, the logistics are impossible. Now, sooner or later, we're going to run out of natural petroleum fuel. And in our opinion, the best alternative is to continue to make that fuel out of coal and shale. Now, today, it's more expensive and wouldn't be economic. But frankly, the way the price of oil is going up, it won't take too much to make the cost of making today's type of fuel out of coal. So in our opinion, that's the alternate fuel. It's the same fuel, but made out of coal.
And this is the next generation of Boeing jetliners taking shape. They'll be more fuel efficient than present aircraft and less noisy, but otherwise not much different. But are there limits to where the aircraft designers can take us?
In the past 20, 30 years, whenever the technicians could come up with something that flew higher, faster, or further, why, somehow or other, there was always money and we went and built it. Nowadays, we have a lot of technical ideas, but the business is really big business now. The amounts of money required to start these programs are very large, and so I think our decisions have shifted from purely technical to one of business. In other words, is it really going to pay off? Is it really worth the billions of dollars that it takes to start it? So I think
That's the thinking behind Boeing's present decision not to go ahead with its supersonic transport. And they have other aircraft on the drawing board that are technically possible to build if anyone's prepared to pay for them.
This is a very large special purpose freighter. The unique characteristic is that the payload is carried throughout the total span of the wing, which makes the structure much more efficient for flight loads. And as far as landing is concerned, we do the same thing. We put landing gear over the entire span so that although it requires a special wide runway, the landing loads are minimized. So we can get a very high payload to gross weight ratio of some 50% with this, whereas today's airplanes are about a third.
Is this to scale with the Boeing 747?
Yes, they're both to scale, and this is a Ford tri-motor to scale as well. So you can see that we've come a long way in size.
A very long way in building large, safe and efficient aircraft, yes. It's been less successful in coping with its customers on the ground. The age of the jumbo jets has often filled our airports with confused and angry people, struggling with a system that has simply failed to keep pace. With the day of the 1,000-seater aircraft about to dawn, with business still growing at 13% a year, there's an uncomfortable time ahead of us. Tokyo's Haneda Airport handles only domestic flights, yet this is how it looks today. It would be far worse if the Japanese hadn't built a second international airport at Narita. What's happened at Tokyo's Narita Airport is a warning to us all. In 1966, even before construction began, local farmers and radical students demonstrated their opposition to the airport, opposition that very soon turned violent. For 10 years, the battle flared and faded, but never died, bringing to our screens these extraordinary images of medieval warfare. Thousands were arrested, thousands more injured, and among the casualties were 3 policemen killed. Great steel towers erected by the protesters to impede the opening of the airport were eventually captured and destroyed. In January of 1977, the government announced that Narita would finally open, 7 years later than planned. But the protesters hadn't finished yet. On the opening day, they mounted a mass attack on the main airport gates and actually broke through. But this was just a diversion. The real damage was done by a few infiltrators who entered the airport through the sewers, scaled the control tower with mountaineering gear, and destroyed all its costly and vital equipment. Finally, in the summer of '78, with the help of 13,000 riot police, Narita was in business, but only just. The place is still an armed camp, protected from the constant threat of sabotage by a 17-kilometre fence.
What a fence it is. I've seen dangerous prisoners confined by far less formidable obstacles than these that are used to defend this shining new airport. There's a double chain-link fence, 10 foot high, topped with barbed wire, a deep ditch in between, that's filled with barbed wire. On the outer fence, there's a sophisticated electrical alarm system that responds when one of the wires is cut, or even if it vibrates to any unusual degree, and brings guards racing to the spot. So sensitive is the alarm system that it's frequently triggered by the jet stream of landing or departing planes. And of course the protesters don't even need to breach the fence. The threat alone is enough to tie down a permanent security force 1,800 strong, with thousands more riot police on call. Even for the bona fide traveller, getting into Narita isn't easy. And for greeters and wavers and shedders of farewell tears, it's strictly no entry. Thanks to all this, not a single flight has so far been stopped by the protesters. But the cost has been crippling, leaving the airport corporation with a £16 million loss in 14 months. The airlines are generally satisfied with facilities at Narita, but they're chafing under the limits set by the single runway. They want 2 more. And they'll only get them if the second stage of the airport is completed. It's a big if. Mr. Gen Ogawa is one of a dozen or so farmers who must vacate their land if the second phase construction is to begin. And he and his friends are united in their determination to stop it. So far, their protests have been peaceful. Mr. Ogawa believes that it's the government that's dedicated to violence.
It all depends how our airport authority and government act, but there might be some other violent incident. And they don't like violence and they try to avoid violence all the time.
Will he continue the struggle, whatever happens?
どんなことが起こってもこの戦いは続けていくつもりですか? He will continue to struggle till the day no airplane to leave or to land in this airport.
So his ultimate purpose is to close Narita.
最終的な目的というのは廃港に持っていくということですね。He feel the responsibility to show the government and authority that rightness of the farmer who are struggling against the airport.
The farmer may be right, but in the end it's unlikely that he'll triumph. The interests stacked up against him are simply too many and too great. For the passengers up aloft, air travel has become a more tranquil experience. On Japan Airlines' internal flights, you can watch your own graceful descent on television. It's supposed to calm your fear of flying and to fill you with confidence. While those down below fill their ears with cotton wool and their hearts with resentment. Large aircraft are not nice neighbours, and the dilemma of where to put them is not easily solved. Events at Narita may encourage governments in Japan and elsewhere to seek more imaginative solutions, like this one at Nagasaki. This, they claim, is the world's first marine airport. Like an aircraft carrier, it floats off the southern coast of Japan, with all its noise and nuisance safely out to sea. Planners who favour the offshore site at Maplin for London's third airport will find encouragement here. To build it, they took this hilly little island and knocked it flat. Everyone, except perhaps the handful of displaced families, is delighted with everything about it. With one reservation, it's a long way from the city. So how do you carry passengers quickly between population centres and remotely sited airports like this one? Japan Airlines feel that they've found the answer, something that will dramatically speed up travel between city centre and airport, and this is it, the HSST, high-speed surface transport. Travel in it, it's like a small, smooth, elegant railway train, but the language they use is the language of flight. And that is appropriate because we are in fact flying at the magnificent height of 10 millimeters above the track. This is in fact floating on a magnetic cushion, and it's powered by a linear motor. Now this is only an experimental craft. When it's fully developed, they claim that they'll be able to cover the 40 miles between Narita and the center of Tokyo in only 14 minutes, traveling at speeds in excess of 200 miles an hour. Now this one, since it's only experimental, was traveling then, I think, at no more than about 60 miles an hour, but then there's only about 1.5 kilometers of track here, and I'm glad they were going no faster.
Much faster.
The HSST has been taken several steps further by Japan's national railways. This prototype recently broke the world record for rail travel with a speed of 286 miles per hour. It's said to be quiet, pollution-free and fuel-efficient. Looking to the future, high-speed trains may be the answer to a lot of transportation problems. The bullet trains of Japan and other advanced passenger trains like the 125 have already proved their value travelling between city centres. And it's thought that in Europe and parts of the United States, their high-speed successors will win back some of the business lost to the aeroplane in recent years. But not on every railway line. In a country like Malaysia, the train looks less to the future than to the past.
During the course of this series, one of the most frequent complaints we've heard about the aeroplane is that it deprives its passengers of the traditional pleasures of travelling. It seems that some of you look back nostalgically to the good old days of the ocean-going liner and the passenger train, when travel was leisurely and charming, and when you could actually see the countryside that you were passing through. Well, this journey is certainly leisurely enough. The train set off from Bangkok almost 48 hours ago. And by the time it arrives in Singapore very shortly, it will have covered the 1,250 miles down through Thailand and Malaysia at an average speed of 26 miles an hour. So this is the real thing, is that this is really travelling. Well, 100 years ago they didn't think so. During its early days, rail travel suffered exactly the same criticisms as travel by air. Listen to what John Ruskin said. "Going by railroad I do not consider as travelling at all. It is merely being sent to a place, and very little different from being a parcel." Well, I beg to differ from John Ruskin. After more than a year of intensive travel by air, I know all about being treated like a parcel, and this is not it. On the other hand, I think that if I had to travel this way too often, I might welcome a blissful return to parceldom and getting shoved aboard the first jumbo jet that came along. Another thing that I'm absolutely certain of is that the little state of Singapore could not have developed the way it has if this charming anachronism was its only means of transportation.
The prosperity of Singapore has always hinged upon its communications. First as a major port, and now as Aviation City. In recent years, this city-state of 2.25 million people has invested hugely in man's new mobility, throwing up hotels with a speed and confidence that's made old Chinatown and the mysterious Orient of the travel books almost a nostalgic memory. Because of mass air travel, Singapore is now a truly international city. Its architecture, its hotels, shops and restaurants are the product of an international culture. Tourism has worked the transformation. Already the number of visitors each year equals the population. And even in this tiny country, that trend is being coaxed steadily upwards. Here, present demands and future ambitions overwhelm the past. Singapore has no second thoughts about airport development. No public inquiries or protesters are allowed to stand in the way of progress here. This is the future that they're building, where the aeroplane will rule supreme. When Changi International Airport is completed in record time, it'll be able to process 30 million travellers a year, 13 times Singapore's population. The same expansive optimism has made Singapore Airlines the world's fastest growing carrier. With growth rates of 30% a year, it's pushed ahead of many of its older rivals, using a marketing strategy that puts the stress on the extra special service provided by the Singapore girl.
Don't be so stiff, girls. Morning to you. Morning. Morning, good. Good morning. Good morning. You are taught to walk in a correct manner. As a Singapore Airlines stewardess, you have to be graceful. And what else? Smile. A genuine smile, not a grin. Show off your Colgate smile, but from the heart. Okay. Your shoulders should be always what, girls? Back. Stomach? In. Your back? In. Not out. Huh? Okay? So when everything is all set, we don't have time on board for you to do all that. You have to do it as naturally as possible. Practice this every day at home so that you don't have to go on board and sit shoulders back, stomach in, backside in, everything in, and then when the passenger is calling, hold on, I'm getting everything ready. Don't do that. So everything is all done. Walk along the aisle, look at the passenger, say good morning. Okay? Be very genuine. Don't stare. All right? And don't look at the next object, which is in the rear, because you're so nervous. Your wish is to go from one galley to the other galley without looking at the passengers. Don't do that. Okay? Smile, not at only one passenger in particular, not at men only, even at the ladies. Give them a genuine smile. Say, good morning, madam. How are you? Etc. Okay?
Patricia, you should remember the coasters. The coasters are to be given before, not after the drinks have been given. Right?
In developing countries where salaries are lower and where a tradition of personal service survives, airlines can perhaps offer more care and attention for the same money.
I'm so sorry. Hold on. Never mind. I'll get it.
You shouldn't be talking to yourself. Right? Okay.
All right.
So now all the passengers have got their drinks.
The girls used in Singapore Airlines' vigorous advertising campaigns are not models. They're all working cabin
He
staff.
said cheese in his own language.
Alan, your double chins are showing. Come on. Look at Jacques. That's good.
Some airline executives believe that it's time to change this image of air travel, to drop all the elitism and luxury, and to suggest instead the reliable bus service. That is not the view of Singapore Airlines Managing Director, Mr. Lim Chin Beng.
What I can perhaps foresee in the future, and not too distant future, is that supersonic travel will definitely be an everyday occurrence, and at that time perhaps there will be even a bigger aircraft than the 747, perhaps carrying up to 1,000 passengers, and there will then be specialized flights for the businessmen traveling on supersonic, and those pleasure travelers who can't afford to pay a supersonic fare, they will travel on the cheap fare on the bigger aircraft. So I think there will be this separation of these two types, basically these two types of passengers. And perhaps this is why we are already wanting to go into the Concorde venture with BA to prepare the ground.
One of the visionaries of the aviation industry, J.R.D. Tata, the founder of Air India.
We have only just entered the realm of supersonics. There was pioneering to be done there. It is being done. though it's still uneconomic. I think undoubtedly this will progress in the years to come. But there is still hypersonics to come, if one can look far ahead enough. Semi-orbital travel. After all, one could circle the Earth in about 90 minutes, and therefore there could be no place in the world that would be more than 45 minutes away. The only problem is that if you are in on an orbital circuit, you may have to go round more than once, say 1.5 times, if the distances are not what you want.
There's been some discussion about hypersonic airplanes as a next step up from a supersonic. Now there you're talking about Mach numbers of 6 or so. My own feeling is that that's probably the most difficult technical area to be in, and I would assume that the next step beyond a supersonic airplane is really ballistic. In other words, you might as well go out and come back in again. There again, technically, this is feasible. The question again is, a business standpoint, is the economics. But I would, from a technical standpoint, I'd much rather handle the semi-ballistic type of a mission where you actually blast out of the atmosphere and come back in again. I think technically that would be easier than flying along steadily at a Mach number of 6. It's just plain an easier job.
Orbital, ballistic, hypersonic. So very easily the technology of air travel obscures the fact that, like the horse and carriage, it's only the means to an end.
I think perhaps that is the greatest contribution that the aeroplane will have made to the world, the extent to which it can bring people together. I mean, when millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people are going to travel from one part of the world to the other, as each time that they go, they see something new, they see new people, they see how people live, they begin to understand them instead of suspecting them. Oh, I have no doubt that this is, it has a tremendous role to play. It has played a tremendous role. Today, the people of England understand, know about India and Africa to a much closer extent by seeing them themselves, the places themselves, than they did merely by seeing films or television, with due respect. And I think even television shows and films will, on the contrary, encourage people to go themselves to the place that they have seen on the screen. And by bringing people to get to know each other, to understand each other, it will help doing away with what separates people, the prejudices, the suspicions, the dislikes. And if there is any chance to have one world of a humanity that really cooperates and leads to a better life for all, I think it will owe much to air travel. And therefore I shall continue to be as excited about air travel, air transport and aviation as I was 46 years ago when we started.
When I first went to Singapore 25 years ago, the journey took 6 weeks by sea. Today, travelling home in Concorde, it's 9 hours, with the kind of service that reduces the travel adventure to the level of a smart cocktail party. In the days of the horse-drawn carriage, the poet Tennyson had an extraordinary prophetic view of what air transportation might be today, which he expressed in these words: "For I dipped into the future, far as human eye could see, saw the vision of the world and all the wonder that would be, saw the heavens fill with commerce, argosies of magic sails, pilots of the purple twilight dropping down with costly bales."
That poetic vision is a present reality. In 60 years of scheduled flying, the heavens have filled with commerce, with argosies of magic sails. And what, in the name of Alcock and Brown, is going to happen in the next 60 years? Well, personally, I hope, if I dipped into the future, as Tennyson did, that I should be flying at least as fast as we're flying now. That's Mach 2, 1,320 miles an hour, 1 mile on every 2 3/4 seconds. Or I hope I should be flying very, very much slower. Because after a great deal of subsonic flying during the past few months, I've concluded that subsonic is long enough to be tedious and really not long enough to be very interesting. But I think my overwhelming feeling as we come to the end of this series is best reflected by what Dame Freya Stark said to us in an earlier program. She said, when everyone travels, it'll be very nice to stay at home.
As one of those fortunate enough to live in an exceptionally beautiful part of the English countryside, I've sometimes regretted the nomadic life that the development of air travel seems to have made inevitable, and been tempted to remain earthbound and cultivate my garden. And yet the experiences provided by air travel have been infinitely rich and varied. A treasury of unforgettable, incomparable, and priceless moments that are my personal diamonds in the sky.